We continue our World Cup preview series with Iran, the Pot 3 team in Group B. The Islamic Republic of Iran is definitely in the news right now for a lot of reasons that don't have to do with the FIFA World Cup, but one that actually does is the fact that some of the human rights activists in Iran have petitioned FIFA for Iran to be kicked out of the World Cup. Now, obviously, based off everything we know about FIFA, I don't think that's going to actually happen, but it is something that's in the process of happening. If you want to read about what's going on in Iran, I do have a link at the top of the description to an article that can educate you on the subject far better than I would be able to. What I'm here to do is talk about the actual soccer because that's what I know about. So please do check out the article. And for now, Iran is still in the World Cup in Group B. And how exactly did they get there? Well, qualifying in Asia actually takes forever. You have to play 18 matches if you go all the way. You start in this second round, and the only round before it is like this little qualifying thing. And in the second round, Iran actually had a pretty hard time. You have to finish first or be one of the better finishing second place teams in a group of 5. And Iran ended up only 3 points away from getting freaking eliminated. And this is because early on in the qualifying process, Iran not only lost to Iraq, which is a huge derby for them, they lost to Bahrain. That isn't as bad as it sounds. Bahrain's actually a fairly competent team that only allowed 4 goals in 8 matches during this portion of qualifying, but they also got eliminated because Iran and Iraq finished ahead of them. Iran had to go through a very difficult stretch of their schedule towards the end of that, where they had to play Bahrain and Iraq again and had to win both of those matches in order to finish semi-uncomfortably in first place. But once making it out of this preliminary round, in the final round, Iran had absolutely no problem at all. Them and South Korea rolled. The group finished in the top 2 positions in Group A, and they were so far ahead of the other teams that they clinched their World Cup qualification before almost anybody. And they only allowed 4 goals over the run of 10 games, which is really good. So Iran looking like a dominant force, which would lead you to believe that Iran has always been a comfortable World Cup participant, which actually is something that surprised me because Iran seems to be a perpetual participant in the World Cup now. It wasn't always the case. For Iran, this is actually their 6th ever World Cup appearance, and they had only had 3 World Cup appearances until 2014, and now they've qualified for 3 straight. In those appearances, Iran has never gotten out of the group stage. It got closest to that at the last World Cup in 2018, in spite of the fact that it was in a group with Spain and Portugal. It was a group that looked normal that ended up being absolutely insane. Iran went into the last match where if they beat Portugal, they actually had an opportunity to win the group. They were helped out by the fact that Morocco held Spain to a draw, and Spain needed a 91st minute goal to get to 5 points from 4. Iran went behind to Portugal thanks to Ricardo Quaresma. Portuguese. Ricardo Quaresma. It's still wrong. He scored that goal with the outside of his foot, but Iran came back and scored a penalty kick and actually had a huge chance right at the end of the game to win it for Mehdi Taremi, but he couldn't finish it off. Iran ended up finishing 1 point out of knockout qualification, but they proved they're not to be trifled with. The other time they finished 3rd in the group stage was when they actually finished ahead of the United States and beat the US 2-1 in the French World Cup in '98. That surprising lack of World Cup appearances and success does not translate to the Asian Cup, where Iran's actually been fabulous. Or at least they were in 1968, 1972, and 1976, because Iran won 3 consecutive Asian Cups back then. As for their most recent continental competition, they made the semifinals in the 2019 Asian Cup, which was obviously 3 years ago, so I don't know how much we can take from that. They essentially took care of their business, didn't lose in the group stage, beat Oman and China, and lost to Japan in the semifinal. They beat everybody they were supposed to beat, and then were handled by Japan 3-0. In that tournament, they got 4 goals from Sardar Azmoun and 3 goals from Mehdi Taremi. So when we look at who to highlight on this Iranian team, it's got to be one of those 2 guys. And unfortunately for Sardar Azmoun, the striker now at Bayer Leverkusen in Germany, he has torn his calf, and if he's available for the World Cup, he obviously won't be buzzing at 100%. So the key player for Iran is the center forward Mehdi Taremi, who you might remember I mentioned actually missed the huge opportunity to beat Portugal and knock Ronaldo out of the World Cup in 2018. Yeah, he needs to actually convert those if Iran's going to have a chance this time around. Because despite their great results in the World Cup stage 4 years ago, Iran is actually not a team that has a lot of world-class talent throughout. They are fairly dependent on their domestic league, which is not terrible, but it's also not good, and they lack a good number of players playing in top European leagues, which makes Mehdi Taremi, a 30-year-old seasoned striker with 41 goals in 76 games for Portuguese giants Porto, regular participant in the Champions League as well, incredibly valuable in terms of matching up against world-class opposition. With Azmoun likely at least limited by his injury, Mehdi Taremi has to score likely multiple goals in order for Iran to get out of the group stage for the first time. The Asian giants have been right on the edge and haven't seemed to be able to break through to anything since 1976. They haven't even made the final of an Asian Cup since then, and obviously never been out of the World Cup group stage. Mehdi Taremi is the type of player that can change that. But now for the type of formation we can expect to see from Iran. This is pulled from a recent friendly against Senegal. They drew. They also beat Uruguay in a recent friendly, so perhaps Iran trending up. They've stuck with a classic 4-3-3, but in a match particularly against England, who's also in Group B, we could expect a 4-5-1, which they did pull out in the win against Uruguay. Mehdi Taremi sits in the middle, and there are various options on the outside from Golazadeh to Jahanbash. And typically, you'll see Brentford's Salman Ghoddos featuring in the midfield, but there will also be a lot of names that are unfamiliar that usually play in the Qatari Stars League or the Iranian League itself. But much like we see with the Qatari national team, this playing in the same league actually contributes to a certain solidity and understanding between the players and the tactical style, something that likely contributes to Iran's ability to frustrate opposition. They play with pride and they play with understanding of each other. So what are their chances of actually getting out of this group? Well, drawing the United States from pot 2, that is something that the Iranian team is probably excited about. That's accessible. That's a winnable game for Iran. And thus, there's a window for them to get out of this group. England is cold. They're in terrible form. The United States is young and entirely unproven. And Wales is not a talent-first team. They're a team that, much like Iran, wins with togetherness, toughness, and a set national team plan. But based off the totality of results and what these teams have done in past tournaments, both continental and intercontinental, Iran is still the worst team in this group. Wales made the Euros knockouts. The United States owns both trophies in CONCACAF right now and seems to be at its high water mark, at least in recent memory. And England went to the World Cup semifinals and the Euros final. Iran absolutely has the capacity to make these matches interesting, but especially without an entirely fit Sardar Azmoun, this is going to be very difficult. And I think, on my prediction, Iran is going to finish in last. But do not be surprised if they pick up a draw or maybe even two throughout this group. At the very least, frustrate teams in a way that perhaps they aren't expecting to be frustrated. Now, if you missed our preview of Group A entirely, or of the United States and England, that is in this playlist right here. So I highly recommend just not moving and continuing to binge these and learning about the World Cups so that you can impress people with your brain.